When you picture the ancient world, what comes to mind? You probably see these massive, powerful empires, right? But do you see them as totally separate islands of civilization, completely cut off from one another? For a long, long time, that's exactly how history was taught. But what if that whole map is just wrong?
Okay, so let's just dive right in with a huge question. Were ancient China and the great civilizations of the Middle East total strangers? The answer, as it turns out, is way more exciting than a simple yes or no.
You should really think of this whole thing as a giant historical puzzle. For generations, we had this one picture of the ancient world all set up. But now, new discoveries are forcing us to basically throw that old map in the trash and start piecing together a brand new one. And this new map, it challenges the whole idea of isolated empires.
And here's the big shift in thinking. The old view, it saw history as these separate bubbles. You had China over here, the Middle East way over there, and just vast, empty nothingness in between. But what modern archaeology is showing us is a completely different picture. A highly connected world, a massive network of long-distance connections crisscrossing the entire continent.
So how in the world are historians even piecing this new map together? Well, the answer is literally in the ground. We're turning to archaeology to find the clues that written history might have just completely missed.
And this is where the real detective work kicks in, because ancient texts can be surprisingly quiet about these super early contacts. I mean, some entire cultures left no written records at all. In those cases, it's the physical stuff, the objects they left behind, that have to tell the story. They become our #1 piece of evidence.
And what kind of objects are we talking about? Well, think of it like a detective's toolkit. Archaeologists are on the lookout for really specific things, stuff like axes, knives, swords, even things like mirrors and burial traditions. When you start seeing similar styles pop up in places thousands of miles apart, well, that gets you asking some really interesting questions about how they got there.
But, and this is a really big but, we have to be careful. Just because two knives from 1,000 miles apart look kind of the same, that doesn't automatically prove people were trading them back and forth. It's totally possible for different groups to invent similar solutions to similar problems all on their own. This is where good history is all about careful, nuanced detective work, not just jumping to the easy conclusion.
So if we have to be a little skeptical about some objects, what's the slam dunk evidence? Turns out it's metal. Let's dig into how metallurgy, that's the science of working with metals, really forges the link between these ancient worlds.
So why metallurgy? Well, because the complex techniques for making alloys like bronze, or really specific styles for casting and shaping metal, those are just so unlikely to be invented by pure coincidence in two different places. When you see those techniques spreading, it's a super powerful sign that the knowledge itself was on the move.
And this isn't just a hunch. Take the work of experts like Jinjin Mei. He points to the Xinjiang region, way out in northwest China, as a critical piece of this puzzle. The Bronze Age metalwork they found there has undeniable connections to traditions from much farther west. This suggests it was a key corridor for metallurgical ideas flowing between east and west.
Okay, so we've got really strong evidence for contact. Awesome. But that just opens up the next big question. What kind of contact was it exactly? Were people actually meeting face to face, or was something else going on? First up, you've got the most obvious possibility: direct trade. This is probably the picture that jumps into your mind, right? Caravans crossing the desert, merchants from one empire setting up shop in the market of another. Regular, sustained, face-to-face contact.
The second model is what we call indirect exchange. And this is cool. Picture a valuable knife or a new idea being passed along like a baton in a relay race. It travels from one group to the next, crossing these huge distances. But the person who started the race and the person who finished never ever meet.
And third, there's cultural influence. This is where a society sees a style or a technique from far away, maybe through that indirect exchange we just talked about, and then starts making their own version of it. So the idea travels, even if the actual objects don't.
So, what does the evidence actually tell us? Well, for this super early period, the idea of direct, face-to-face trade is actually the least supported. Instead, the evidence points overwhelmingly towards indirect exchange and cultural influence, and getting our heads around that is the key to unlocking the real story here.
All right, we've looked at the clues, we've weighed the theories, so let's assemble all the pieces and reveal the final picture of this ancient interconnected web. Remember that old map with the big empty spaces? It's time to fill them in. That huge region of Central Asia, it wasn't a void, it was an active corridor.
Think of it like a bustling highway of cultures and ideas, populated by all these mobile peoples who were basically the connective tissue between the great empires.
And here's pretty much how it worked. An idea or an object starts moving. It gets passed from one group to another and another, creating these long chains of contact. And over time, these chains stretched right across the entire continent, linking worlds that seemed impossibly far apart from each other.
So the most important thing to get is this. The ancient world wasn't connected by a few simple straight lines on our map. It was a complex, tangled, dynamic web of connections, all woven together by countless groups of people over thousands of miles.
So you might be thinking, okay, that's pretty cool, but why does this ancient history stuff really matter to me right now? Well, it fundamentally changes how we see the whole story of human civilization.
So, let's recap the big picture. We've learned that ancient Eurasia was way more interconnected than those old maps ever let on. We've seen that the contact was complex and mostly indirect. We know that Central Asia wasn't a barrier, it was a vital hub. And maybe most importantly, we've seen that real history isn't about finding easy answers. It's about asking better questions and carefully weighing the evidence.
And that kind of leads us to a final thought. If our understanding of something as huge as the ancient world could be so wrong for so long, what other facts of history that we just take for granted might also deserve a second look?